The EVGA GTX 1060 3GB gaming is the first 3GB model I could get my hands on. The overall quality is what you would expect from a budget card. It sports a standard 90mm fan surrounded by a visually satisfying shroud. Underneath the shroud is a standard heatsink design that is much cleaner than some of its competitors. Come on guys, we don't need copper pipes popping out of our cards when they're just $200 cards, or do we? And do we need more than 3GB? That's the questions today. Stick around. Display options include 3 DisplayPort 1.4 ports, a single HDMI 2.0B port, and a single dual-link DVI. Next we have a 6-pin power adapter with a SAD 3+1 power phase that offers an advertised max power draw of 120 watts. However, during testing, the card drew up to 140 watts max, so it's definitely undershooting how much it's actually pulling from your system. Even crazier is the fact that this is hands down the best overclocking card in the Pascal line that I have gotten my hands on yet. While I experienced no crashing or artifacting during my testing, I am wondering if there is something off with this particular card because of its extra wattage usage and temps. During testing on stock fan profiles, the card got relatively hot for third-party coolers. Max temps got very close to 90 degrees Celsius, capping out at 87 degrees Celsius. Luckily, if you decide to crank fan up to 100%, it is relatively quiet, only hitting 12 decibels above my ambient room noise. So maybe those copper pipes are worth it. Under the hood, the card sports a 1506 MHz boost clock, which we were able to push to a whopping 2139 MHz with overclocking. It communicates with 3 GB of GDDR5 memory over a 192-bit bus at 8000 MHz effective clock that easily overclocks to 8400 MHz. All the benchmarks are run in 1080p at highest available settings unless those settings are specific to either AMD or NVIDIA, for example, Pure Hair in Rise of the Tomb Raider. Starting with Gears of War Ultimate Edition, the 3GB of the GTX 1060 hits 116.3 frames per second, once again showing the improvements in the API and engine in preparation for what I hope is Gears of War 4. Even still, the GTX 1060 can't beat out the RX 480. TimeSpy Graphics Test 1 scores 44.65 frames per second, falling in line between the RX 470 and 480. This seems to be what I was expecting from this card. However, surprisingly enough, the 3GB gaming beats out both cards in TimeSpy Graphics Test 2 with 36.99 frames per second. Not everything is rainbows and sunshine for the 3GB of missing VRAM on the GTX 1060. It's extremely noticeable in Rise of the Tomb Raider as it falls down to 25.4 frames per second. Granted, there are warnings not to attempt to run it at these settings. However, it's important to note that extra gigabyte of RAM in the similarly priced RX 470 definitely comes in handy here. The VRAM advantage continues in Forza Motorsport 6 Apex Beta, where the 3GB card reaches a playable 59.77 frames per second, but falls significantly short of the cards with more available VRAM. Thanks to the wonderful optimizations in Doom, the 3GB 1060 barely loses ground to its bigger brother, the GTX 1060 6GB, or whatever the fuck we're calling it, with a massive 120 frames per second. Hitman showed similar results as the 3GB GTX 1060 barely fell short of both the 470 and its bigger brother, pulling in 63 frames per second. Vulkan is looking better and better in the Talos principle as the 3GB version of the GTX 1060 hit 78 frames per second, which is right on par with its bigger brother. The NVIDIA optimized Total War Warhammer gave the 3GB version of the GTX 1060 an advantage over both AMD competitors with 37.7 frames per second. So what do I think? Well, The EVGA GTX 1060 3GB gaming comes into a weird shifting GPU market where prices aren't even quite settled in. While it's obviously meant to be a competitor to the 4GB version of the RX 480, it often falls short of the $20 cheaper RX 470 4GB version. While it shines in some areas like noise levels, it still runs hot without custom fan profiles. With an emphasis on VRAM lately for textures, I still do think that 8GB is overkill for 1080p gaming, but it's obvious that 3GB is not enough. Therefore, I can't recommend this GPU over its competitors or its bigger brother. Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know if you think that 3GB of VRAM is enough in the comment section below, and do you think we need copper pipes popping out of our shrouds everywhere? I think we might, and then I think we need more than 3GB. I think the answer to both of those questions is yes. What do you think? And until next time, I'll see you next Tuesday.